we're going to bring up to the stage Unfiltered Media. Unfiltered Media is an innovative, full-service digital and social media organizing and strategy firm with decades of experience offering effective digital strategies. Unfiltered Media worked with us to provide social media context analysis of what people are saying online about Native people and our issues. We examined conversations on X and on Reddit and really leaned into how audiences are talking about our communities and our issues and how far these conversations actually reach. But probably most interesting is which groups of influencers are driving these conversations over time. And so I think for a lot of us that are on the front lines of organizing and using social media as a tool to get our messaging out there, this is going to be so important for our work. And so it is my honor and privilege to welcome to the stage Alan and Craig from Unfiltered Media and Crystal Echohawk, who will be moderating the conversation.
How's everybody doing? Are we awake, sugared up, caffeinated for the last presentation of the day? I've been really looking forward to this one a lot. So Craig and Alan, thank you so much. And I want to kind of level set before we have you guys jump in. But when we first did this study back in 2017, this social listening study, it was fascinating, right, to think about how we could dial into all these channels across social media and listen to what is the conversation about Native peoples. And it was so fascinating when we initially did it, the conversation was like very little, right? I mean, it was just, or it was like a lot of hobbyist, kind of weird, spirituality and, natives talk to animals, and those were kind of the conversations. But then it was fascinating because then Standing Rock really took off. And then suddenly to see the conversation shift, and that you were seeing American, non-Native people for the first time, whoa, have you checked out what's happening with these Native Americans and this pipeline and water? And it was fascinating. You could really kind of see that there was a very big consciousness shift around Native people. And so that was just fascinating, as I'm kind of just creating a baseline there. For what we saw. And I think the other thing that we saw in terms of Native people is that we had a very active presence, despite the fact that we have a quote-unquote small population, that we were really active on social media. So that was where we saw it. And I think we saw that there was a lot of room to grow, but there was so much opportunity, and I when we talk about Standing Rock a lot, I just think about it as this moment where when that blew up, it was I think about invisibility almost being like this concrete barrier over the top of us where people can't see us. And it was like Standing Rock just fired these fissures into some of that profound invisibility and erasure. But social media was the vehicle, right? Facebook Live came on board right at that time, and it was the pressure of Native people and people up at the encampment being on social media that broke through into mainstream, and you could see there was a shift in consciousness. So I just wanted to level set that, that's the last time we did that. So I'm so curious now to turn it over to you gentlemen, and what did you learn?
Well, it's really great to be here, and we're very excited about doing this research, and we did a whole bunch of interesting things, and wanted to share that with you. We analyzed 3 online conversations, looking at what people were saying on X or Twitter. It was Twitter back when we did this, and also on Reddit. So we had a lot of data to look at, well over almost 2 million records to review, to analyze. We looked at the U.S., how the general U.S. public was talking about Native Americans. We looked at how Native Americans were talking about themselves, and we looked at how Native Americans were talking about politics in order to get a sense of what this was about. We studied, what we did is we took an empirical approach to identifying influential Native Americans on social media. We started out with Twitter because we have like deep access into the data there. And so rather than starting with a list of people who we expect to be influencers, we started by identifying people online, on X, who self-identified as a tribal member in their bio and had at least 200 followers and were geolocated within the United States. So that's how we identified them that way. We had a large list of tribal names from across the country, including Alaska and Hawaii, just to the earlier questions. And we identified, I think, around 1,740 people who identified themselves as Native American by tribe in their bios and met those criteria. And we analyzed them, and we used the top 100 of them or so as sort of the influencers in the group. We then also looked at the general U.S. population, general U.S. public on Twitter, and what we were looking for there was basically they used one of the names to describe the Native Americans, indigenous people, indigenous Americans, Indians. We were looking to see what those rankings were. The first thing I wanted to get, I thought was important to get at when we were looking at this was the power of names. I just hear all over, there's power in a name. So what do people call Native Americans? What do Native Americans call themselves? Interestingly, we found that both the general public and Native Americans were more likely to call themselves referred to as Native Americans, followed by indigenous people much further behind. The difference we did find was that Native Americans were like 78% likely to, I think it was 78% likely to, no, 68% likely to refer to themselves as Native Americans. The general public, only 58% likely. I don't have exact information as to why that's the case, although I am Jewish, that's my tribe. And I know that in my conversations with people, I tend to find that some people feel reluctant to refer to me as a Jew because they think that that's a negative word. And I just say, well, no, it all depends on the context and how you say it, right? Dirty Jew is bad. Oh, you're a Jew. Cool. That's good, right? And we call ourselves Jews. So that disconnect may be what's going on here, and I thought that was particularly interesting.
I think it's reflective of the just urge and the results that we've seen from the last two panelists, and the idea that America is trying to become more aware, but it doesn't know how to become more aware. And so the use or the heightened use of indigenous peoples, especially on Indigenous Peoples Day, unsurprisingly also the only time that you saw a major spike of indigenous topics in the time frame that we looked at this, is a recognition that I want to care, I don't know how to care.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot, and we definitely saw the indigenous people label spike because of the holiday. Next key finding we found, and I think that this is one that really raised some interesting eyebrows when we gave our initial findings, is that when we look at how Native Americans talk about politics, what we find is they talk about politics the same way that the rest of Americans talk about politics. About half of them talk about it like liberals, and about half of them talk about it like conservatives. And you can see in this graph that there was a little bit of a gap where liberals had the edge at the beginning of our data, but by the end it was pretty much neck and neck. So if you're thinking that you're talking to an audience that is monolithic, progressive, or to the left, or democratic, or however you want to categorize it, that's not the case. It's definitely all over the map. And we also saw that there was a high degree of proliferate posting from the right in your community than from the left, much more likely. Maybe it's driven by, maybe there are bots enhancing it, I don't know, but there was definitely a lot more volume there.
I just think you see the algorithm.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things that happened was we identified that Lakota Man 1 on Twitter, X, is the most influential Native American on social media.
How many of you have heard of Lakota Man? How surprised are we? Raise your hand. That he's the most influential. Yeah, please. How?
So he has well over 1 million followers. He puts his Native American heritage up front and center in his conversations, in his posts. But he is, not only is he far more prolific in posting original posts than literally the entire leadership influencer community offline of the Native American community, but he's way more likely to reply to people who respond to him. It is the prototypical example of let's start a conversation and I will continue to participate in it as you respond to me. And that creates an enormous amount of goodwill and engagement and curiosity and conversation back and forth between him and his audience.
So can I just clarify so that he is way more influential than all the other Native influencers combined?
Yes,
by far.
By far.
It's not close.
Yeah. So when I looked at the Illuminative provided this list of 58 sort of the influencers you would expect, including Secretary Havland, congresswomen that we talked to, lieutenant governors, as well as leaders of organizations.
Actors, like a lot of our favorite Native actors, artists.
Right. And so we looked at that, and the first thing we did was we kind of threw them into the overall analysis to see if it changed the political distribution, if there was more affinity for what Native Americans were saying online with regard to politics, and it didn't really change anything. But when we looked at the overall, the total amount of I'm going to forget the total volume of impressions, but the amount of interactions, responses of all 58 combined was about half of the number of posts in reply to other posts as Lakota Man by himself, and we're talking a lot of interaction. Now, I'm not advocating that all of you think about becoming as engaged and active as Lakota Man. That is an extreme, but there's a large gap between where a lot of Native influencers are online and where they should be to be that much more influential online. So why is Lakota Man so effective? He asks a lot of questions. And he gives a lot of answers so that you don't just, and some of them are sort of, catchy, what do you think of my, of this, something my family did or this thing. Some of it has nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with culture, Native American culture. It's just about him and his family. But he asks a lot of questions and he gives a lot of answers. He gets into conversations with people. He talks a lot about his views. He personalizes it. He posts often about, as I said, regular topics, and he's socially generous. He reposts other people often and starts conversations with other people. So it's not just about him publishing content. And this is sort of a phrase that came out in, that we like to use that I think resonated a lot in our presentation earlier to the team, was that social media is not a publishing operation. A successful social media program, especially for an advocacy organization, is not a publishing operation. It should be an organizing operation. And so if all you're doing is using it to distribute information, you're barely scratching the surface of what it can do.
I would add that he's the perfect example of what I often say, that I'm not in the truth business as a digital organizer, I'm in the propaganda business. And this is a perfect example of effective propaganda because it doesn't look like propaganda. And that's the biggest difference between a publisher and an organizer, is that when he communicates to you, it's in this facade of so much personal, and so you feel like you know him, his personal story, and so the controversial or impactful messages are layered and sandwiched in between entertaining and engaging content, which diffuses the, perhaps, let's say, it confuses the human brain into thinking that what he's saying is harmless, so that your normal mis and disinformation sensors that are on don't activate because it's sandwiched in between innocent material. So that's another reason why he's effective, is because even when he is communicating a message, a persuasive message, you don't necessarily know as the user that that's what's happening because of this reputation and kind of social generousness he has. It doesn't seem like it's being forced upon you.
Yeah, well, I want to take a look at, we identified as I said, we identified the top 1,740 self-identified Native Americans, and then we looked at the top 10, and among the top 10, these 4 in particular popped out as being sort of prototypical of who you might either empirically think is the most influential or based on reputation and who they are most influential. These are based on top 10 ranked based on how big the reach is, which is essentially their how many followers they have, give or take. So again, Lakota Man number 1, notice he has, was it
514,000.
514,000 reach. I think he has over 1 million followers, though, so his reach isn't quite as big as his actual followers. And then the Cherokee Nation at 70,000 followers. Then Zaboike, I'm sorry. Yeah, at 50, just under 56,000, and then at the bottom, Navajo Times, a newspaper, right, 54,000. So you'd think that, well, number 1, notice the big gap in the reach. Number 2, let's go into kind of the approach here. Lakota Man offered, basically generated, last week I ran the numbers, 224 million impressions on his post last week. That's his impressions and impressions generated by people who retweet and reply to him. So that's the conversation.
That was just in 1 week.
In 1 week, yeah. And he posts and replies many times a day. All right, that's one of the things that he just does that's really, really powerful. When we looked at the Cherokee Nation, they had 6.9 million impressions last week, and they had no reposts of any other account, and only 1 the previous week. So when you share others, we're talking about generosity. This is not a generous approach to social media, it's a publishing approach. Now, of course, your mission may be all about just posting information and being an information source. And if that's your mission, well, then you're doing your job. But if your mission is to build community, mobilize people to take action, and change the narrative, you need to do more than just publish information.
I think a great example of this is like the Standing Rock we've been using as a quarter of it. So like Standing Rock is an amazing story. It activates anxiety, it activates awe, it activates anger for sure, for all of the personal story reasons. But as a story, it in itself was not enough to achieve the success that it did. Many people that me and Alan work for, Pete Calhoun, and journalists, and a coordinated, organized national narrative structure, and I'm not saying national is necessary, just to be clear, but this is what happened, posted about this constantly, utilizing these emotions in an engaging manner in which they amplified each other's content. They were in bi-weekly meetings coordinating which hashtags that they were using, who to repost, who was going to be the anchor tweet, who was going to go first, how they were going to manipulate the algorithm, staying up upon the algorithm changes that were happening to, of course, limit Native American power during this time to quiet down this story. You have to, as a digital organizer, the story only goes so far. This is where the next part is. This is where you really make the impact, and where you see the impact difference between those who take the time versus those who kind of don't.
Yeah, often back to this, publish versus organizing model. I've had many conversations with organizations who say, oh yeah, we have a great digital team. We have a designer who can do video production and make great memes and can create good content, and so we're all set. And my reaction is, well, once you post it, the work starts, right? You're organizers, right? Raise your hand if you consider yourself an organizer. Right? Organizers, what do? You reach out to people. You find them where they are. You talk to them. You find out what they care about. You talk to them in the language that they use. You talk to them about the issues that they care about, and you connect it to the issues and goals that you're promoting in order to bring everybody closer together. And good organizing, really effective organizing, isn't just knocking on the door once. There's follow-up. Now, one of the beautiful things about social media is all the principles of organizing can be applied to social media. And when you combine social media organizing with offline organizing, now all of a sudden you're going like, hey, knocking on the door, talking to somebody, oh, by the way, can you follow us on social media right now? Take out your phone maybe, or do something along those lines. And then they're following you, and you have the opportunity to keep the conversation going and build that audience, and then they know, oh yeah, this is the person who came to my door, and now I'm talking with their colleagues online. This is a great thing. This makes me feel part of the team. I often find it's not just that you don't even have to give them hard things to do. If they feel like they have a seat at the table, sometimes that's enough. I remember in the first year of the Obama administration, the most popular thing he did on social media was he set up a webcam in the room where they were working out the details of the Affordable Care Act. People could just watch. That's it, just watch, kind of like the cameras at Standing Rock. You could just watch as a fly on the wall, but you were allowed to be in the room. And sometimes that little bit of going just beyond, this is what we did, post, end of story, to, hey, come and join us and watch and listen. And then, you can post comments to us and we'll see them on social media. That closes a loop and creates a sense of excitement, a sense of engagement, a sense of empowerment to the audience because they feel like they're part of the process. It's not being done behind doors without their knowledge.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah.
So let's see. Yes, so don't just publish, organize, right? Oh, sorry. If you only talk at your audience, you're not getting the full value of social media. In business, we talk about walking away from a deal with money on the table, like you didn't charge enough, you didn't offer enough because they would have gone for it. Well, this is the case with social media. Social media lets you not only, like the difference between a social ad and a regular display ad is on a social media ad, they click through and they can leave a comment and they can participate in the conversation. And if you don't have a strategy for what to do with the people who engage with your ad, then you're leaving money on the table. You're not engaging them as fully as you possibly can. That opportunity just doesn't exist with display advertising, and so the mindset is totally different. Make it personal. Even when you're posting from organization channels, if you're the person posting for Illuminative, for example, sometimes it's good to say in the bio, managed by, with the handle of the person who's managing it. But because remember, when was the last time you had a social relationship with an organization as opposed to a person?
It's true.
Right? Social media is about people interacting with each other. And the more you personify, the more you make people realize that the organization is people talking to you who work at the organization, who share your goals, the more you connect with them as opposed to talking to some non-human institution.
Amorphous identity who's only posting and will never retweet you because they're too afraid that you're going to say something else.
Yeah. So speak from a human voice, share your values. Remember, when it comes to political and advocacy issues, if you start right in with facts and figures and arguments with somebody who disagrees with you, they're just going to dismiss you as bad. They don't know what they're talking about. If you connect with them as a human being first, and you have the perfect opportunity because you are already connected, and you just have to remind people of that and go out there and say, hey, this is us talking. Then you can start to build a really powerful community that starts with values and then moves into the more controversial type of issues. Engage in conversation, move your people into your online community. So, to that extent, I have an activity for everybody. if everybody here, before you leave this summit, follows everybody else here on every social media platform that you're using, and promises that from now on you will amplify each other. And if you also, when you post stuff, remind people to amplify each other. Don't be afraid to ask, right? And and then beyond that, if each of you then take it upon yourself to make sure that your own audience on social media is more than just each other, but expands out into your community and beyond your community, so that when you all amplify each other, you're amplifying each other outside the box, not just inside the box.
I want to put this in like concrete terms for everybody. If you do this, everybody in this room represents a larger set of influencers than currently is in operation right now, trending hashtags every day. So if you do this, you will leave Lakota Man in the dust. He will be a figment of your imagination. This is getting some incentive to hear. And you will start dominating the online narrative about Native peoples. This room of people is sufficient to do it. Let me give you some examples.
Preach that again, please.
You get this amount of people to retweet each other with a good anchor tweet and a good story, you're going to get 300 million impressions in a day. You're going to start hitting the top 10 of the Twitter board. You're going to start getting Grok to write some really weird like summaries of what your hashtag is about. You know, you're going to really enjoy that, feel good about it. It's all it does is take a room of people this large. That's it.
Right. And notice we tend to talk a lot about Twitter or X, partly because of the data. It's easier to read the data, but also because Twitter or X is still the place where news happens. All the reporters are there. All the lawmakers are there. All the organizers are there. All the advocates are there. And so oftentimes stories break, campaigns are launched there, and then they move to other platforms. So that's a good thing. But it's important to be across all platforms. I know Craig wants to say something about this.
Well, it's just like Twitter's where it starts, but like this is to show you the scale of the problem that faces every single one of you, especially those people who are into video. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads represents a daily viewership roughly half that of YouTube. YouTube is one platform. It's like 13 billion monthly views. The next highest platform is Google at 10, and then after that it's Facebook at 2 billion. TikTok's not even a billion yet.
Yeah.
So if you're not on YouTube, if you're not on social short form video, you are not reaching a fragment of the conversation.
And
That's extraordinary, and so I really want to follow because I'm watching people go, what?
Yeah,
especially when you said that about TikTok. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. The thing about YouTube in particular is now a big feature of YouTube is their shorts.
Yes.
And the shorts are the same video format as TikTok and Instagram Reels and Facebook Reels shorts, right? So So rather than think about, am I going to be creating content for TikTok, think, I'm going to create video content. And I'm going to post it on YouTube. I'm going to share it on TikTok. I'm going to share it on Instagram. I'm going to share it on X, all the different platforms. But I'll start by putting it up on YouTube because it is the motherlode of audience, and it's the same physical format for the video.
So I've got a question here. So, because so many Native, or so many just organizations, but I mean, we're here as a Native community, like we have limited resources, right, to be able to invest in like how many people we can have to run our social media and do all the things, right? So, and I love what you said. Digital organizing is organizing, right? And this is like where we all got to be leaning into. So if we are looking at it through that lens, like we are organizing, we've got to be organizing. And we have limited resources, what are the 2 to 3 platforms that we really is a best investment for us to really lean in on?
It should be X for the agenda setting. It should be TikTok because ironically, TikTok videos that are made on TikTok perform the best on YouTube, which is why I say it, because then you do get to the holy grail of YouTube. YouTube is the holy grail. It's also the hardest platform to get your message across because of how much it preferences right-wing media over left-wing media. But those are the three platforms. If you reach those three, you will have had societal consciousness penetration.
And to this point of preferencing conservatives over liberals, the algorithm comments that we heard earlier from Charlene, for example, the algorithm is something we have to deal with. But our experience has been that if you organize real people in sufficient mass, like as Craig was saying, as a core group, the people in this room and your networks, you can beat the algorithm, even if you never get even if the algorithm is rigged so that you never get listed in the top ranking. You're still going to get the reach, you're still going to get the frequency, because you will build your audiences and you will be pushing your message directly to them, regardless of whether Elon Musk decides whether or not he's going to let you show up on his board. And we definitely think that there are times when they just turn off a certain message because they don't want to go there. But it doesn't matter. Even in those situations, when we do this stuff, we still get the same kinds of volume of activity, reach, frequency, because our network is big and it gets it. So if you build a network that does that, you get to do that as well.
I'll add one more thing there, because I think it's an emergent thing that a lot of people are scared to talk about. And my day job is running an AI company, which is like a scary word for people, but like, here's the thing. In the propaganda war, the people who win will be those who use AI to create the most amount of propaganda. It is as simple as that. If you are not using AI to help you create a TikTok script that would have normally taken you 2 hours in 10 minutes because you fed it essentially a talking points and you asked it to create a TikTok script and you have to make it 2 edits instead of, coming up with it from scratch, you're going to lose, because I can tell you right now, as someone who's creating bespoke AI products for the left, they are definitely making bespoke AI products for other people who may not have our values or interests.
Yeah.
Wow. And thank you. My head's just spinning. I've got like a million questions here. I wanted, while we're in the topic of kind of looking at some of these forces, right? Because I do think there's always a predominant sense that we think, okay, well, Indian country kind of skews center left, right? And that, and then, much smaller kind of parts of our population are more conservative, right? But you that was, I think that we remember when we first presented it to the Illuminative staff, everybody's like, what? To kind of look at that. So what kind of trends did you see as you saw, on both parts of the spectrum of, I want to start with the kind of what you're seeing with that on X around the kind of more right conservative versus kind of progressive left?
Yeah, that was a very interesting fight. I mean, it wasn't as shocking to me. I worked in former Representative Ann Kirkpatrick's office, so I happen to have some experience trying to earn the vote of Native peoples or Indian country. So in that fact, it didn't respond, but it's like a mirror image of America. Like if we do a general tracking, our version of a general tracking poll, I wouldn't want to insult Celinda with the basicness of our version of it, but you see that general population tracking poll, and we try and add weights in for the fact that Elon Musk has most certainly tinted the conversation to the right, but Indian country is, shockingly to us even, tracked it almost exactly. If you look at the average conversation amongst the general population in terms of left and right and the dominance of it, you see that almost exact same pattern for Indian country. It certainly is not as friendly. And this is talking about land, climate, and stuff like some of the focus groups that we're talking about, how they pretend they're of climate. There is a significant amount of climate denialism. Climate hoaxes was one of the top uncommon word pairs called an engram, coming out of right-leaning Indian country. So it's sort of like you want to think about it as this special community that might be acting differently, but online they look almost exactly like we would expect the general population to look like.
And one of the things that we do notice on that one is that there's the volume seems to be turned up a little bit, the frequency of the climate hoax messaging. There seems to be, at least on some of those keywords, more than the number from the climate change is real and we've got to do something about it. I don't think that reflects the actual, I mean, we're not using this to say that's the actual proportion in the population. That's the proportion in the voices being raised. And so, as we say, if you guys start to really step up on the organizing and lift up a much more powerful voice from the work that you're doing, you can easily overwhelm the other side. Right now, they have that edge because of frequency.
That's the biggest difference, left, right, online. Message discipline. If you look at the many different ways in which the left calls climate crisis, they're going to use the climate crisis, they're going to use climate change, they're going to use global warming.
Climate action.
Climate action. There's one phrase for the right. Climate change is a hoax. That's it. So like that message discipline also has a penetrating effect as well.
Yeah, repetition.
So it's like you have this slightly, they have an organizing advantage, but they also have a message discipline advantage as well. Yeah. So that's what I see.
Words matter and how we're framing it, but I love the message discipline. You know, and this isn't in the research, right? But it kind of lends me to the next thing as I see some of this, but it's just being concerned about the rise of misinformation, disinformation. And I think I'm so curious, right, as we were kind of having some of these conversations, particularly about our own community. Like, how much is that, you know, becoming an issue? Because I feel like post-2020, and especially as we got further into COVID, the vaccines came, and then all of a sudden there was just this rise within our community of conspiracy theories and other things, and it was fascinating. You know, again, we do the Indigenous Futures Survey in partnership with Native American Native Organizers Alliance, and we found in our 2022 survey that out of the 5,000 people surveyed, only 60% believed the 2020 election results that Biden won. Even though self-reporting, they were predominantly, I would say at least 70 to 80% of our sample trended Democrat, independent, socialist.
Some of them still thought it was.
Yes, so you look at the majority of the sample is center progressive, but only 60%. And I put it out there because it's not something we asked you guys to look at, but I think as we're together over the next couple days, we need to be asking, where do we want to go deeper? What are more questions that we need to be asking as organizers, not only as we think about non-Native people and how we need to change them. I think we increasingly need to be thinking about our relatives in our communities, right?
I love that you brought that up because, like, as an AI professional or whatever, it's clear that it's already causing a multi-fold increase in mis and disinformation online, and it's only going to get worse as more people adopt it. And this is where our natural combat for this, and this is why we're asking you all to follow each other, is that you are the solution to this problem. In that the one way that in this world in which our shared truth has essentially been obliterated, is trusted messengers. You are your community's trusted messenger. And we were talking about mavens and stuff with a few other people at our table, and it was a really interesting conversation. But the only way to get someone to convince them of the facts, the truth, the reality, is if you know them and you trust them. Your relatives and your relationship to them is the most powerful tool you will ever have. And psychology tells us it's basically your only tool. So this kind of social media organizing of trusted messengers, and this is sort of where like there's a little bit of a lie in the volume stats. It's like, great, he has 10 billion views. How much of that actually matters, right? Because you can have 10 billion views. Generally, psychology tells us it takes at least 10 to 15 views of traditional media to change your mind. On digital, that's like 17 to 25. And so you start to do the math on how much frequency has done it. What I can tell you the most, though, is for all of that, it takes one impression, it takes one message from a trusted messenger to achieve the same effect.
But I will say that having that message from the trusted messenger is important, but the distribution network that amplifies it ensures that that message is in front of the audience that you want it to be in front of. So it's not good enough just to post that important message from that trusted messenger. That message has to be seen by the audience you're trying to reach.
I guess my point was, if you have a network of 1,000 people who have 1,000 reach, I would rather take that than one person with 1 million reach, is my point.
Yes.
1,000 people with 1,000 reach, far more important, far more impactful, far more actionable in its ability to either drive persuasion or action to do something good.
Because just think of the natural ability of 1,000 people to create the repetition of the message that you need. Whereas if one person's trying to repeat themselves all the time, everybody's going to unfollow them because they're boring, saying the same thing over and over again.
Well, this, oh my gosh, this is triggering so much, but I think this example kind of brings something, a couple different pieces of this together. So one is around trusted messengers, but I also love, like, when you're really telling us we got to organize, we digitally got to organize, but man, it's got to be connected to offline organizing too.
Yes.
Like, if we are really trying to do this. And I just think back to the campaign to get Deb Haaland nominated and confirmed. And I'm looking across this room because I know so many people participated in that. But it was like multi-level, right? There was a hashtag, Deb for Interior. There was a level of message discipline, but then it was looking at, it became something that everybody felt like they wanted to be a part of and participate in. So you had this kind of surge of a huge coalition of organizations that we all were like, we want to see this happen. So we all banded together and everybody was taking turns sort of leading and posting. But then I really think, like, some of the things that opened it up to, like what you're saying, like, you don't have to have 1 million followers to have influence. You know, I think about when we worked with Native Organizers Alliance, was part of that coalition, and they used, like, a campaign to get online petitions. I think something like 40,000 petitions was sent to Congress for Deb. That was like organizing, right? But that was, how much? Letters. Sorry, they were letters. They weren't petitions, they were letters. Right, and that was all kinds of people. But it was also organizing even, you know, Zooms for all kinds of, like, folks from all over Indian country, from all walks of life, to participate and watch the confirmation hearings, right, and other things. So it was like a multi-pronged thing. And then, of course, you have all these incredible, like, DC insiders and different people, and certain people that are sitting over at this table that called Nancy Pelosi's office in the 11th hour and made a plea to the speaker to say, you know, because it really did come down to that. So it was such a beautiful campaign, and I love to talk about it because it was all those elements. Mm-hmm. It was digital organizing, inside game, outside game, and really where everybody felt like they had a place in that. So I just wonder, before we go into Q&A, is there anything you want to say about the power of combining both types of organizing?
Quick one, and then you can go long.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things that we've seen that's been very successful of facilitating the closing of the loop, of getting the people that you reach offline to connect with you online, is the use of QR codes. Now, you've been using it for these questions in here, people popping in their phone, and the next thing you know, they're all answering the question. Well, a QR code to follow you on social media, a QR code to sign a petition.
Or even a QR code to join a WhatsApp group, so then you can all just post the social media you have to amplify in the WhatsApp group, and then everybody gets it, and then press repost instantly.
Now, I did notice that in the survey that I asked people before the session to say what social media they most use. Nobody said WhatsApp, but that's for the most use. Is there anybody in here that uses WhatsApp at all? Okay, so start to think in terms of, well, how do I start to organize people the most effectively? As I was saying in the, backstage, in the green room, in a conversation, my first rule is organize your colleagues first. So if you work in an organization, do what we're talking about getting everybody to follow each other and amplify each other in your organization with your colleagues. Remembering it's their personal channel, so you can't force them to do it. Right? But as long as you respect that, you're more likely to get them to do it. And then move yourself out to allied organizations within the Native American community, allies outside, and those concentric circles that Celinda was talking about earlier.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up. I love the term movement of movements because that's movement of many movements, sorry.
Yes.
Because I used to work at a tax coalition, and getting people to talk about taxes is very much like going to the dentist. But it took me relating my story to everybody else's issue. And in the same way that like we briefly touched upon about how people were regulating Native peoples to a single issue or set of issues, you talk about healthcare, you talk about the land, you talk about every issue. Connect it to everything, then organize them. The first, I like to, it's what he said. The first, if you think that posting is the job, you are doing 10% of it. The actual, when you get to the post, you have done 10% of the actual job that it takes to be a digital organizer, to be successful online. The 90% of it is convincing people to care.
And that means text messages, direct messages on the platform that you're on. Sometimes for some of your the people you're organizing, it means a phone call.
And it's also like, how easy and how relatable is your content? How easy was it to post? How many clicks did they have to go through? And how much did they have to transform the post to get it successfully posted on their own platform or retweeted? All of these factors go into how effective your campaign is. And so that's why I think we say it's like 90% is the rest of the job, because everything that you do after you post is as intentional and much harder than it was to even come up with the exact right post, even though you may have hated going through that process with your executive director who made you change 10 words because you didn't want to.
And this becomes one of the main reasons why we advocate using AI to help those early drafts, because you can draft a whole bunch of social media content that is reflective of talking points that you give the AI, and then you can spend your time promoting the post instead of writing the post, because that's the, as I said,
'cause that's
one
labor
person
intensive,
posting something
Yeah.
persuasive that nobody sees or nobody interacts with.
The
doesn't
worst
go
post
anywhere.
with all the organizing is always going to perform better than the best post with no organizing.
There you go. All right, let's open it up for questions. Boy, I'm seeing all kinds of hands. I think we've been favoring this side of the room, so I'd love to get a question over from this side of the room.
Hi, this is really great and has provided a lot of language that I've been trying to articulate to a lot of the organizations that I work with about why, honestly, the social media strategy sucks, for lack of a better word. And just to put it out there, since we're in the room, my handles are at Len Nessifer, at Natives Outdoors. Give me a follow. But one of the ways in which I've grown following has been posting just dumb content. And so I've become like a meme lord. It's funny, it's really funny, but within that is building, a lot of the sort of scaffolding of building the trust of what people will then believe on the things that I say about climate or about indigenous issues. I like to say it's like feeding the people the vegetables after I've given them the candy.
Exactly.
And
Well, you need, it's really important for each of you individually and as an organization to find your voice, to reflect that voice in what you say. Sometimes it's snarky, sometimes it's fact-checking, sometimes it's very serious and wonky. You have to find your sweet spot. You have to figure out what your audience is looking for, adapt and adjust accordingly. Those three emotions, the AAA emotions that Craig alluded to earlier, anger, anxiety, and awe, those are the three emotions that if you trigger them, you're more likely to get people to share your content, right? Other emotions are important, but they just don't work the same way.
You're honeypotting them. That's what you're doing.
yeah, totally. And I think one of the things that I've also seen in organizations that do make it effective is that they're empowering their social media manager at a lower level to have the freedom and latitude to work within that.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that I've seen where failure often happens is when you have top-down leadership who often aren't the consumers of the media or the intended audience are then driving the direction and action. And that's where, if I start seeing that, that's like destined for failure in my opinion.
I often like to remind people that your network of people that you're mobilizing are your strategic partners sharing their own personal publication platform, not your army or peons.
And I just want to highlight this. As someone who's been internally frustrated by this dynamic, this is happening in almost every organization. Your comms director does not know what's popular online. unless they have lived it. All right? So if you think the message that the comms director is writing for a press release is going to be effective online, I can tell you right now it's not. It's, in fact, detrimental for you, because if you start posting content that's bad and then ask other people to post that content that's bad, you're going to get a negative reaction to that. So I would have, it's just a rule of thumb. If your social media post looks like a press release, sounds like a press release, or even comes remotely towards being beneficial for the press, stop it. Now,
There's just been an intervention, an important intervention here. Okay, I might be guilty of that. Okay, let's look out here in the audience. We've got more hands up. Let's go over to this side of the room, or center, I think. Look like we have some, yep, right there.
Thank you. Buju, Beijigo Noden Quain Indigenous Magazine Ndoda, Mesquabe Kong, Minawa, Gichinami Benizibing, Ndonjaba, Mekweijang Nada. Hi, my Anishinaabe name is Beijigo Noden Quay, which means first wind woman, but my government name is Roxy Sproul. I'm a citizen of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe, out of northern Wisconsin, but I grew up in Marquette, Michigan, and I live in Lansing now. I'm a fellow for the Center for Native American Youth with their Building Communities of Hope Fellowship, which is a fellowship for former Native foster youth who want to reform the foster care system. I'm also a recent graduate with my bachelor's in social work from Michigan State University and a current student at University of Michigan getting my master's in social work. Sorry. I've had a lot to say the past few hours.
And you did it beautifully. I don't even think you breathed.
Thank you. I have a lot to say about a lot of things, but in terms of social media, and this is going to be, I don't know, I just have a lot of thoughts and feelings about social media, and I feel like some people might be able to relate, maybe not, but I'm very passionate about a lot of these topics, and I have a lot of worries about social media, and I feel like it's going to be kind of interesting hearing from a Gen Z person, like what I'm going to say, but I know they already know how I feel about social media, but in hearing you guys talk, and then also hearing my own battle with social media, and also my perspective as a social worker, to me, social media and the use of social media should be classified in the DSM as an addiction. And that is the one addiction that that will never happen. Guess why? Because your doctor, your provider, your primary care, everyone, they're all doing it, right? Why are we, anyways, so that's my first thought, right? And it makes me very scared. AI makes me very scared as well, but again, when you think about social media, how many of you had to go to the bathroom and were on your phone, hiding, that, do you know what I mean? That to me aligns with the behaviors of addiction. And I think that's really scary, especially for people in our generation. And I think too, in hearing you guys talk about digital organizing, it's very scary, the difference in generations, I guess, in their ability to navigate social media. For me, as a Gen Z person, I have never gone a day of my life without knowing what the internet was. You know what I mean? I've never had, most of my life, I always knew what social media was. And for me, and for, I'm sure, anyone who's Gen Z in the room, it is extremely difficult to separate ourselves from social media. And that is where I feel like there's a difference in the ways that generations are navigating social media, because for these conversations that are happening, these really difficult conversations that are constantly happening on social media, that's all we know. That is our life in and out, right? But for others, they're allowed and have had the skills from not even having social media for decades to have a life outside of social media, right? And so I think it's very difficult in teaching our young people to have these really, really hard conversations constantly on social media without giving them the tools on how to react when backlash happens. And I'm going to open up about my own story really quick, because this is why it makes me scared. When I was a senior in high school, I was very passionate in my community about changing my mascot. That's how I got into learning about the research about Illuminative. And so I spoke and I gave a national speech about changing the mascot and moving beyond whitewash history. And for months, I was sent death threats. I was called a suicide bomber at a school board meeting. My family was sent death threats constantly. The school principal had to call my family during winter break and ask me if I was okay. So when we're talking about doing this organizing is scary because we're not teaching our youth the tools on how to deal with that and separate that from their own selves, right? And I also have issue when it comes with AI. I think we need to be having further conversations about being careful and intentional about what we're doing with AI. There's a lot of stuff that I've been listening to about our language. What is AI doing with our languages when we go and say something on AI in our language? What's happening with that data? And then again, for us as Native people, I think we should be having conversations about our data sovereignty. What is AI doing with that? You know what I mean? We don't know. These are questions that we don't know the answer to. And then also, when we're talking about indigenous advocacy, we're talking about indigenous activism. For me, one of my values as an Anishinaabe is truth and speaking from our heart, courage. Why is AI involved in advocacy when advocacy should be straight from my heart as an Ojibwe woman? That's what I get concerned with, because I think when we're talking about defending our people, defending our lands, we need to continue to use our hearts. And I understand that AI might be more effective and social media might be more effective, but it's scary to me to see that this is the direction that this is going. And I don't know if anyone else feels that same way, but if anyone else, has any advice for those feelings, I'm glad to hear it, but I'm just very scared with how these things are going.
And I want to say thank you so much for everything that you shared, especially your personal story. Because I know how traumatic that is. I've had my DMs filled with nasty, nasty, horrible things over the last 6 years. And we've had huge, we've had moments where things that we've said are not popular and people come and it's a real thing, where I know our staff that work in our, front line and our social media, there's been times where it's been devastating. I think that we've all kind of gone through a level of PTSD because it can be it's vicious. Right, and you look at the way things have evolved into people doing doxing and other it's really taken a whole nother level. So I think you raised something important, and yes, your generation, I think we all have to remember that you've never not known having internet and social media, right? I mean, I miss MySpace. If anybody of you old folks out there, I miss MySpace. But I think this is something that we all have to be looking at, because one of the things, because Illuminate has been such a socially driven, social media driven organization, I have definitely just seen the tide change in just the level of just vile, horrible, and also the polarization and the way we're turning away from each other and kind of attacking each other. I think that these are all important conversations, and I think there's also the mental health component of it. Because going door knocking can be dangerous too. Ask Judith, she got bit in the behind at Standing Rock by a dog, door knocking. But it's also, organizing digitally also has, its things. And I think as we look at all these things, we have to be thinking about safety, all the things. But I'm interested, gentlemen, what you have to say.
So it's going to sound odd coming from me, but I would ban social media because I think it's universally horrible for all of us. So in that regard, you might find an odd audience here. That being said, I think there are a few things. One, as a former digital director and kind of manager of my own staff who had to encounter this, having very understanding days off at any request, at any time of your employee or a social media manager is a must, because it is an actively toxic job that requires therapy to do. I know, because it has screwed me up before. I would add just one point about AI, and there's a lot of misinformation about AI and what it is. It is quite literally just a prediction machine, and I definitely understand your issues with AI and data sovereignty, because there's one lesson that I think big tech has made abundantly clear, is that they will never, ever let us build power that would threaten theirs on their platform. It's the changes to Facebook, it's the changes to Gmail, it's the changes to advertising, and every single step they have banned us to do it. That is not how AI works, in that big tech does not own AI. There are AI companies like mine who create their own AI that fine-tune the AI to talk and act like us, and don't talk to anybody's servers but our own. And I think there is some danger in not adopting AI, and maybe this wasn't your larger point, and certainly the concerns that you mentioned are very real. It's just, I know for a fact that the person with AI is going to take the person without AI's job, in the same sense that the person with AI and the ability to produce mis and disinformation in multi-languages. That's the other thing, is like, we're just talking about English for right now, but like, AI is extremely good at learning any language you feed it, and it basically takes 10,000 examples of a language for an LLM to learn a language, depending on the linguistic complexity. And so it's going to become a world in which every state actor who doesn't like us is going to meddle. Every individual in America who has access to a computer in their basement is going to create their own AI. Because I was the guy in the basement, that tells you how hard this is. And so these impacts are coming, and without our own, I feel, without answers on how to combat it, unless we just ban it all, which I don't think will happen. And again, outside state actors are still there.
And I would add, I have the whole social media dynamic of being trolled and attacked and things like that. That is terrible. The purpose of those trolls and attacks is to drive you off the conversation. You, who has something positive to add to the conversation, is being discouraged from doing it so that the conversation online no longer reflects your views. If all of us take that approach, then the online conversation will never reflect any of our views and will only reflect the other side's views. That is not an acceptable outcome.
It's like the online version of a fire hose in the civil rights movement. The fire hoses that were used on protesters in the civil rights movement is the same thing that activists are trying to do to silence voices now.
On the left, yes.
And so it's like a safety in numbers thing.
Yeah, and so what we're suggesting here as the antidote to disinformation and trolls and abuse and all the toxicity is to flood social media with strong, moral, value-driven, purpose-driven action, advocacy for a world that we think will be a better world, and to make sure that that conversation is not only more prolific than the other conversation, but more persuasive than the other conversation. And if we let them drive us away, I mean, every time somebody tells me that they're leaving Twitter because there's too many conservatives there, I'm going, yeah, well, all of Congress is there and all the reporters are there. Are you just going to hand that over to the opponent? That doesn't make any sense at all. When you're struggling against an opponent, a value opponent, you can't let up, because the losing would be worse than not participating.
And we want to say this in no way to undermine the clear fear and impact these threats have on your individual life. It is unfortunately the sacrifice, I guess.
But there is strength in numbers. You know, if you're all there interacting with each other, if when you post something and somebody else attacks you, everybody in this room comes along and defends you against them, that troll goes away and your message reigns supreme. And I think that's what you really need. That's really where we want to get to. As long as it's there as one of the for some age groups, it is media. It is the most common form of media that they consume. That's something, you can't just ignore that as a channel and hope to succeed as an advocacy movement.
It's dominating our world. I mean, some of us are old enough to remember when it didn't exist, right? And what good old-fashioned organizing and all of that looked like. But we're going to wrap up. But I think there's a couple things I want to make sure, because I know I'm looking at Jade over here going like this, But because it's that time of day, we all need a break because we've taken a lot in. But I think the key things I want to kind of pull all these presentations together today. And I think the thing that we have to see is that in 6 years, we are making real progress on so many levels as Native people, right? Number one, we are moving. Because the numbers, I remember talking to, I think, Mark Trahan yesterday, and he was like, well, the one thing I would say about the data this time is it's not like, oh my God, like when we first saw it in 2017, it was shocking. And I remember crying, you know, we felt so invisible. So one, we're making progress, right? And I think the big thing that we've been hearing across these presentations today is that there's people that wanting to lean in. We definitely have seen movement where people want to know more, but they don't quite know how to learn more. And they're not sure if the sources that think they're finding are actually good stuff. And I think that was actually like just a thread through all three presentations. There's so much opportunity here. There is a ton of opportunity. We've talked a lot about the vile kind of horrible forces we need to be aware of. But I think the biggest thing you're leaving us with is organize, organize, organize. And when you said posting is only 10% of the job, right? And I guess the final thing, I really thought this was so brilliant. I saw a lot of head nodding. What if we all do follow each other before we leave here, right? And we all start following each other, and then we all start amplifying and supporting each other, right? Imagine if we start getting some message discipline and about thinking about some key hashtags maybe that could be created out of here, and even around some of these strategy tables we're going to be talking about. So these are all the things. This is why we're here. But my God, Unfiltered Media, Craig, Alan, you guys rocked our world. Everybody give them a round of applause. Thank you so much.